So what you saw right there was Joe Biden, who made the decision that, since he is president, he should probably do something every once in a while. So he traveled to Uvalde to go to a memorial for those who were tragically killed last week, to listen to the concerns of the people there. And they provided those concerns, saying, do something. Do something, do something. The exact same chant that we and our viewers have been sending towards Joe Biden for months and months and months. And he said, I will. He in fact gave a thumbs up to the crowd and said, I will. That's not how I would have handled it. That felt to me a little bit like what Donald Trump would have done in that situation. They're not interested in your thumbs up, man. They're interested in you actually accomplishing something. But he would have us believe coming out of that trip that he actually is going to do something. He in fact told reporters yesterday that I think things have gotten so bad that everybody's getting more rational about it. At least that's my hope. Now, he also tempered that comment with a little bit about what he thinks he can and cannot do, and we will dive into all of this. But Caroline, I know people have the expectation that he, as president, he made claims that he would do something when he was running before the election. What do you think about the way that he has responded to this most recent tragedy?
Look, I think that time and time again, Joe Biden fails to live up to the probably single most important reason why we got behind Joe Biden ultimately as the Democratic nominee. And that was for his ability to work in a bipartisan Congress. And so far, time and time again, not only on this issue, but countless different issues, he has failed to, in many cases, even attempt to bring people across the aisle, and it's been such a disaster that people in his own party, Manchin, Sinema, he really cannot get on his side. And again, this was the selling point of Joe Biden. I think that it's, we're coming up on the midterms in a few months, which it's pretty universally acknowledged to be a disaster for the Democrats. And these empty platitudes that once actually we did have a lot of hope for in his ability to get things done and compromise, it's just out the window. And I think the crowds in Uvalde really, really, really show that. I think this is a rarity in cases like this in which obviously they had some really strong words for Governor Abbott as well, but I think it's telling that they are just as angry at Joe Biden about this situation and the refusal to act.
Yeah, look, he may not take as much money from the NRA. He may not as aggressively put forward, pro-gun talking points. So the blame in that area is gonna go more towards the right, but he is also president, so it's only fair to put some of it on to him. And you're right, he pitched himself and his allies, his political allies, his media allies, whether they identified themselves as such or not, assured us that he would have not only a special desire to work with both sides, but a special ability. Any Democratic president, no matter how lefty, was gonna have to try to, in some cases, work with the other side. We were assured with him that he would be able to get it done. And I would ask our audience, what would the difference have been if it was Bernie? Like, the thing that they did in a bipartisan fashion was the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Are they implying that Bernie couldn't have gotten that particular bipartisan infrastructure bill passed that effectively handed huge quantities of money over to special interests? Like, some of it's gonna have good effects, sure, but there's not a lot of corporate interests that were offended by the nature of that bill. I feel like Bernie could have gotten that done. At some point, Joe Biden is going to have to demonstrate where these supposed extra skills lie. And in a time where he's saying we're growing more rational about things, maybe he can grow a little bit more rational about the chances of successfully working with the other side. But we'll see. He has a slightly different view of the other side than I do, and he's gonna articulate this here. He goes on to say, some of this is good, some of it is bad. He says the Second Amendment was never absolute. You couldn't buy a cannon when the Second Amendment was passed. You couldn't go out and buy a lot of weapons, and of course, basically nothing like the weapons that are now routinely commercially available were even possible, had even been hypothesized at that point. But he does go on to say, I can't dictate this stuff. I can do the things that I've done, and any executive action I can take, I'll continue to take, but I can't outlaw a weapon. I can't change the background checks. I can't do that. So that sounds very much like a pumping of the brakes, but don't worry, because he doesn't need to do it unilaterally. In his mind, he says there are rational Republicans, and he identifies two of them. Senator Mitch McConnell is a rational Republican. Senator John Cornyn of Texas is a rational Republican. Now, we've got a couple of quotes from them in this area, but Caroline, what do you think in particular about those two fairly senior Republican senators, the likelihood that they are going to just discard their entire past with the gun lobby and be a part of some bipartisan solution to this problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous to say that and label them as that. But what's sort of more infuriating is Joe Biden is saying that these specific Republicans are getting more and more rational. But okay, that's when you step in. That's when you are supposed to go to them, sit down, lock yourself in a room with them and get things done. If you're so confident that people's Republicans' beliefs on gun control might be shifting, that's not when you let off the brakes. That's not when you stand back and say, great, just let them do their thing. It's gonna happen. That is when a leader steps in. This is exactly the moment that, look, that's great. And as we say, after these situations, maybe this is the time. Maybe this is the time for change. But none of that change is going to happen if you aren't acting as your role as the leader of the United States and bringing these people in and explaining to them why this is the moment. It's just, it's infuriating. Like on one hand, he believes that they're rational, but then on the other hand, he's saying, oh, but I can't tap into their rationality because I can't do anything. It makes no sense, and it's really, really disheartening. Yeah. And all of that is to say they're not rational actors, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't really hammer this particular instance home and try and get them at least to concede on a few things that have Republican support.
Yeah, well, look, he's not that sort of person. He doesn't apply pressure. Not to the right anyway, not to his true friends. I mean, the situation that he has sketched out, I think you very accurately described a version of it. The version that, if anything is explained to the voters, is the version that they'll get. So in theory, we've got this moment where a particularly heinous school shooting happened, and that has provided an opening, according to him, where something can be done. The issue is that, in theory, there's at least two different forms that opening could come in, or why that would be an opening, and he is presenting the dumbest version of it. So the plausible possibility, which I don't even necessarily believe, but I can see why some people would be, is that this was so horrible that Republicans can potentially be shamed into doing something. That even they realize, dear God, this was too much. I don't know if I can go forward and just say the normal, the normal lines, the normal, what are the tree of liberty, all that BS. I don't know if I can do that. Okay, and then in that case, pressure them and get something through while they're feeling the pressure. The longer you wait, the less pressure there will be. And I would argue we are already in the waning days of this being a thing where maybe shame would produce an opening. That is not what Biden is saying. He seems to believe, no, this was so bad that they will genuinely change their minds. They will shift their actual opinions, not because they feel they have to in the moment, but because, oh no, we've gone too far down this road. I've been advocating for the wrong thing. I've taken the wrong money. I shall be reasonable right now. And as much as I don't even think the first version is gonna work, or if it were going to, that it still would, who the hell would think the second version was gonna work? And that is what the media will say, because they have this myth that there are reasonable Republicans, some sort of old school, early aughts version of Republicans that might disagree with us on a few things, but we all just want to make the country a better place, and that just is not real. That it's such like a Candyland fairy tale version of how politics actually works. And that's the one that the president, talking about people becoming increasingly rational, is pushing right now, Caroline.
Yeah, I think that's, one thing you pointed out that is sadly probably the most disturbing thing about this is that you're right. The days are waning when we have that power of energy and of shame to act on these certain things. But I would also just like to point out that a lot of these sort of minimal gun control ideas and legislation do actually have some moderate Republican support. I was reading today that things like, increasing security for gun storage has like an 85% Republican approval rating. So while it's absolutely true that there are certain things that the right will not budge on, including, the ability to have assault weapons at the age of 18, there really are smaller things that we have Republican support, popular Republican support to push.
But Caroline, isn't that the issue? So I think you're right. I think that I think you could list probably quite a few things that the vast majority of Republicans would approve of. But when you say Republican support, as you identified, you mean Republican voters. What is the increasing gun security support amongst Republican senators?
That's actually a good question that I am not certain of, because this just goes back to the problem of our current political system that is so invested in tearing each other apart and not leaning into the fact that there is so much popular support for certain gun control legislation. But you're right, it doesn't even matter in our current system if 85% of Republicans want something when their leaders are beholden to, not just the NRA, but different moneyed interests, gun manufacturers, et cetera. It really does expose our government isn't interested in solving any of these life-threatening issues. They are invested in tearing us apart when, I happen to think, and I think this particular Uvalde shooting has really changed my perspective a little bit in that, we're living in, this is just an untenable situation for our country to be in. And the more this happens, the more that I just have to sit and rack my brain and wonder how we can get out of it. Because I think it's very clear that our senators, of course, mostly on the right, but even some on the left, maybe it's not in their interest to help us with these gun control laws. And so for that reason, I'm really trying to look inwards, look to my community, my local government to start those changes there. Because as far as I'm concerned, 85% popular support for certain gun control restrictions, and that doesn't move the needle a little bit. John, when do we sort of give up on our senators and really just turn locally, turn inward? And that's super depressing, and I hate that, but
I think you're right. And you're right to point people in that direction, because I think it's far more efficient in terms of time, energy for what the potential outcome might be. I personally, as long as I can, I'm gonna go at it from the point of view of Littlefinger from Game of Thrones. We need to fight every battle all the time. Unfortunately, that is a recipe for burnout. And burnout isn't necessarily a thing that just all of a sudden you're done. You can see its toll physically on what's left of my face. But yeah, I agree. I think that a lot of people can have a much stronger personal impact by going to the local level, the state level. I don't disagree with you there. Really fast, I want to jump ahead to the chart that we have, graphic 10, to demonstrate a point that Caroline and I were talking about earlier. This is a graphic that I showed on the damage report this morning. This is social media engagement in the wake of different mass shootings. And so there's a lot there to cause you to lose faith in humanity. The Buffalo shooting, it actually did not generate that much talk, despite how horrendous it was, the very clear political motivation of it. A couple million mentions for a couple days, and then that immediately tailed off. Parkland never reached the peak of Uvalde, although of course it was years ago. Social media didn't have as much penetration back then, but it lasted quite a while. Uvalde got a lot of discussion for several days, and now it's down to almost nothing. So look, we're still talking about this because we believe maybe something can be done. We're certainly not chasing eyeballs, because unfortunately a lot of people who are not 100% tapped into politics have moved on. And it will soon be the case, unless Biden suddenly wakes up and decides, oh wait, I am actually the president, maybe I should do something, that we're going to have to go back into hibernation and just hope that the next massacre is whatever that threshold is, whatever the line is, that will be the thing that causes the Republicans to finally see sense, or at least be shamed into not opposing us. We're gonna have to see what that's like. And we will eventually reach it, by the way. As horrendous as Uvalde is, Caroline, you and I perhaps will do a show someday where we'll be covering a shooting that's even worse, where more kids will have been killed in a more horrendous situation. Maybe it'll be a church, maybe it'll be a restaurant, I don't know. America provides a lot of outcomes. They're all bad, but the setting changes. Anyway.
Absolutely.
No, continue, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, I think the one thing that may prolong this conversation is the investigation into the police department. I think there are some current updates that are saying that the Uvalde police is not cooperating with the federal investigation as of like a couple hours ago. Definitely need to be fact checked on that, but that might, the just police absolute bungling of this situation might be something that prolongs this conversation. And it's awful, but anything to keep it in the media.
I think that you're right. I think that there's a very good chance of that happening, and fingers crossed that will help to provide some positive outcome. My fear that I expressed on the power panel last Friday was that the more we focus on that, the more, whether explicitly or implicitly, it trains people that the issue here was that the cops didn't do their job. Ergo, the solution is the cops do their job. But that's not the solution. The solution is not more cops or better equipped cops or faster response times on cops. That might be the only situation we have considering the horrible status quo that we've created, but the solution was for this guy to never have a gun in the first place. And so I'll take it if that's the only thing that will keep people invested, but I am a little bit worried about where that could go.